So my research actually is looking at this whole right to research from the African perspective, and I'm actually trying to construct a right to research. One thing I see is that when we have this conversation, we are always looking at the right to research with regards to scientific research only. But we understand that research is defined broadly to cover scientific research and the everyday kind of research that we do, I mean, for me, I see scientific research as that kind of research that is aimed towards producing new knowledge, new information. Why the everyday kind of research? I regard them mainly as research that just meant to know. You just want to know what's out there. And if we look at research then broadly from this perspective, we'll be able to appreciate the African context, and then we'll be able to construct a right to research that addresses these different dynamics. A very wonderful literature to start from, and written by a Global South scholar, Ajun Apadorai. I saw Professor KLAUS sharing that earlier on the chat screen, and I said, "Oh, good, I'm not alone on this." It defines the right to research as the right to the tools through which any citizen can systematically increase their stock of knowledge, which they consider most vital to the survival as human beings and to their claims as citizens. Now, Arjun talked about the right to research within the context of empowering citizens to participate, to be able to participate in the economic development of their communities, to be able to participate in the democratic process, of their societies, and to be able to, to be empowered as enlightened citizens to solve their personal problems. So if we look at that definition of research, the right to research as proffered by Apadorai, we will be able to appreciate then the African context. And the question then is, what is the African? In Africa, actually, it's not like scientific research does not occur within the continent, but from empirical studies, the level of scientific research in Africa is judged based on the level of the amount of scientific publications. And what is out there is that only 1% of the global scientific publications are from Africa. But I say that we shouldn't actually judge research in Africa from the perspective of scientific research, but from the perspective of everyday research, which most ongoing research in Africa takes. And that's the shape: informal kind of research, everyday kind of research. But you see, why the right to research is important is that whether it is scientific research or what I refer to as the everyday kind of research, the question, that major challenge of access to information, that important ingredients for effective research, remains a problem. And the problem is caused not because the information is not out there, but because of copyright. The copyright regimes in Africa are formulated in such a way as actually not to promote access to information, especially when we talk about education, we talk about vocational training, we talk about cultural participation. These are, if I would use the word, Africanized realities. Studies have shown that the protection of copyright makes it difficult for citizens in Africa to participate, in economic development, to participate in their own democratic processes, because they lack the quality information that are required, that are ingredients for these activities. So in crafting the right to research, we then have to look outside the copyright framework, which still remains a barrier to access to information. Now, can we find that answer in the right to science under the ICESCRO? Of course, we will find some answers. Can we find the answer in the right to education? That we find in most national constitution bills of rights in Africa. Can we find the answer in the right to freedom of expression? Can we find the answer in the right to access to information? Now, these rights are provided for, my research has revealed, in quite a number of national constitutions in Africa. The challenge here is that this right speaks to the right to research, but it looks at research from a scientific point of view. In fact, no attention is given to the everyday kind of research. So when we begin to talk about the duties of states, we should also ensure not to ignore the rights of the individuals, because I think that there is little or what the state can do in carrying out their duties is limited. Limited, one, to the international obligations they have already gotten committed to. I mean, I'm talking about international copyright treaties, and if we drag it further, all the international IP treaties. But if a right to research is constructed, it places the powers in the hands of the individual. I know that questions of enforcement may arise, because that is one of the big challenges of human rights. If we formulate a specific right to research out of these all broad rights, the right to science, the right to culture, the right to property, the right to freedom of expression, the right to education, the right for access to information, if we construct a specific human right that speaks to the nuances of copyright. Now, when I say nuances of copyright, I mean authors already have a right, as we know, which they can enforce without necessarily relying on the state. Within the copyright framework, we know that users don't have a right that they can enforce without the intervention of the state. So when we speak about user rights in the copyright context, we're simply looking at those defenses, those exceptions that have been created. But when we have a specific right to research, now under a human rights framework, it empowers me as an individual researcher. If I have that right to research, I would be able, for instance, I want access to this published material, and I approach the publisher and I say, grant me a license, and the publisher refuses to license, relying on his right under the copyright regime. With the right to research, as an individual, I can simply, litigate that right to. So, but the question then remains, what should the core elements of that specific right to research be? Of course, not completely pushing aside copyright context, but how should we frame that specific right to research that I have in mind, within the human rights framework? What shape should it take? What should be its scope? What should be the core elements? And of course, I'll be borrowing, obviously, from the existing right to science, the existing rights to culture, the existing right to education, the existing rights to freedom of expression, the existing rights of access to information, and even the right to property and the right to equality. So that is just a brief summary of my thought process. Thank you very much for listening.